The stage was set. Bright studio lights bathed the room in a sterile glow. Cameras focused on the man who had for years been the embodiment of logic, innovation, and scientific progress. Millions tuned in, expecting a conversation about the next frontier of space travel, AI advancements, or humanity's future on Mars. But within moments, everything took a turn no one saw coming. Elon Musk, a man synonymous with reason and rationality, uttered words that shattered expectations. He wasn't here to discuss rockets or neural networks. He was here to talk about faith. And not faith in technology, but faith in something far greater. The host shifted in his seat, caught off guard. The audience leaned in, sensing the weight of what was about to be said. Musk wasn't just throwing around vague philosophical musings. He was speaking with conviction, sharing a part of himself that had long remained hidden. As he spoke, his eyes held a quiet intensity, a stark contrast to the analytical coolness he was known for. It wasn't just an interview anymore, it was a revelation. There was an electricity in the air, a strange friction between expectation and reality. The host, a seasoned journalist who had interviewed presidents and billionaires alike, tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground, back to the world of quantifiable facts and figures. But Musk wasn't playing along. He leaned forward, his voice steady, his words deliberate. This wasn't some offhand remark. This was something he had thought about deeply. He spoke about the darkest days of SpaceX, the days when failure seemed inevitable, the days when every launch ended in flames, when investors were backing away, and the dream of interplanetary expansion was crumbling before his eyes. He recalled sitting in silence, staring into the void of space, asking himself the question that logic alone couldn't answer: why? The audience hung on every word. He described the crushing weight of doubt, the voices that told him to give up. Every rational calculation pointed toward failure. And yet, something deep inside urged him to keep going, something beyond formulas and equations. A belief, a faith, not in probability, but in purpose. The host, still trying to regain control of the conversation, pressed him for clarity. Was he saying he believed in God? Musk paused, considering. He wasn't one for grand declarations. He had spent a lifetime scrutinizing the universe, dissecting its mechanisms, seeking truth in the cold logic of physics. But there was a moment, he admitted, when science could no longer answer the deepest questions. Why are we here? What drives humanity to push beyond its limits? What gives us hope when logic suggests all is lost? The tension in the studio was palpable. Even those watching through their screens could feel it. This was more than just another interview. This was an unmasking, he went on, revealing something he had never shared before. It wasn't just about the failures of SpaceX. It was about the loneliness of success. The paradox of having everything, yet still searching for something. More, he spoke of sleepless nights, of staring at the ceiling and wondering if, in all of his efforts to advance humanity, he had missed the one thing that made it truly human: belief in something greater than ourselves. The host, visibly unsettled, tried to counter. Faith, he argued, had long been seen as the enemy of progress, the antithesis of science. Musk didn't flinch. He acknowledged the tension but dismissed the idea that faith and science had to be at war. If anything, he suggested, faith had been the catalyst for human innovation. Every great leap forward, every daring discovery began with someone believing in the impossible. The Wright brothers believed humans could fly before the world accepted it. Einstein believed in an unseen force that shaped reality before it was proven. And Musk himself had believed in Mars when even NASA had doubts. The interview was no longer just a conversation. It was an ideological battleground. The audience could feel the host's discomfort. He wasn't used to this. He had expected Musk the engineer, Musk the entrepreneur, not Musk the philosopher. But the billionaire pressed on. He spoke about a moment few had ever heard of, a time when he almost walked away from everything. He described standing at the edge of collapse, his dream slipping away, and feeling an overwhelming sense that he wasn't alone. It wasn't logic that told him to keep going, it was something deeper, something ancient, something that whispered that his mission mattered. The host, now visibly unsettled, asked the question lingering on everyone's mind. "What exactly are you saying, Elon?" Musk exhaled slowly. Then, with a quiet certainty, he said it, and the world would never see him the same way again. The studio fell into a stunned silence. Millions watching from their screens froze, processing what had just been said. Social media exploded in real time, debates igniting like wildfire. This wasn't just another interview. This was a moment in history, but the conversation wasn't over. Not yet, because Musk wasn't just talking about himself. He was about to tell the world why faith is the most powerful force in the universe, and no one was prepared for what came next. The weight of the moment pressed against the walls of the studio, thick and unshakable. Even the air itself seemed to tighten, as if the world was collectively holding its breath, waiting for Musk's next words. The host shifted in his chair, the tension between them more than just professional. It was personal. He had expected another discussion about Mars colonies, AI risks, or the latest Tesla innovations. Instead, he found himself in uncharted territory, face to face with a man whose mind was supposed to be ruled by logic, yet was now speaking of something that defied it. Musk continued, his voice calm, but the conviction behind it was unrelenting. He wasn't here to debate theology or argue doctrine. That wasn't the point. The point was purpose. And purpose, he argued, was something science had yet to explain. The host tried to interject, to steer things back towards something more familiar, but Musk didn't let him. "Science explains the how," Musk stated, his eyes locked onto the host. "But it has never answered the why," the host blinked, caught off guard. It was such a simple statement, yet it unraveled everything. Science could tell us how planets formed, how life evolved, how energy converted into matter, but it had never truly answered the question that had haunted humanity since the dawn of time. Why does any of it matter? The audience in the studio sat still, no coughs, no whispers, no shifting in seats, just silence. The host leaned forward, grasping at an argument. Faith, he countered, had often been used to halt progress. Wars had been fought in its name. Science had been silenced by it. How could Musk, a man of reason, now defend something so unscientific? Musk didn't flinch. Faith, he explained, wasn't the rejection of science. It was the engine of it. He gestured to the very lights illuminating the studio, the technology powering their broadcast, the spacecrafts orbiting the Earth at that very moment. Every invention, every discovery had begun as an act of faith. Faith in the unseen, faith in a theory before it was proven, faith in the possibility of something more. The host scoffed, shaking his head. It wasn't the same. Scientific breakthroughs were based on evidence, experimentation, trial, and error. Faith required none of that. It required only belief. Musk smiled as if he had expected this. He recounted the early days of SpaceX when experts had lined up to tell him his dream of making humanity multiplanetary was impossible. They had the data. They had the projections. Every calculation suggested failure. Statistically, he should have failed. By all logical measures, SpaceX should not exist. And yet, here he was. The host's face twitched slightly. He wasn't losing control of the conversation, but he wasn't winning either. Musk was threading a needle between science and faith in a way that was unnerving. The host had expected skepticism, perhaps even dismissal, but what he was facing instead was an argument that couldn't be ignored. Musk leaned in now, his posture shifting from explanation to something deeper, something personal. He spoke about the darkest moment of his career. It wasn't when Tesla was on the brink of collapse. It wasn't even when 3 consecutive SpaceX launches had ended in catastrophic failure. It was the moment after the 3rd explosion when he stood alone, staring at the wreckage, knowing he had 1 launch left. Everything in him had told him to walk away. The logic was simple. His funds were gone, his credibility was vanishing, and if the 4th rocket failed, it would be over. And yet, something inside him whispered, "Try one more time." That moment, he admitted, was not based on science. It was based on something far more irrational. Hope? Faith? The host exhaled sharply, sitting back. The weight of Musk's words hung between them. The audience, still gripped in a trance, waited for what came next. And then Musk shifted the conversation. Again, driving it deeper, he wasn't just talking about himself anymore. He was talking about all of humanity. "What separates us from machine?" he asked, his voice unwavering. The host blinked. The question was unexpected, almost out of place, but Musk wasn't finished. What drives us to create, to dream, to push beyond survival and reach for something greater? The host hesitated, searching for an answer. Musk didn't wait. It wasn't logic. It wasn't cold, hard data. It was belief. The unshakable conviction that there was something more out there, something worth striving for. Machines could process information. AI could calculate probabilities. But only humans could believe in something beyond what was known. The host, for the first time, seemed unsure. Musk pressed forward. Throughout history, he explained, humanity had been propelled by 2 forces, knowledge and belief. Science had given us the tools to understand the universe, but faith in something greater, faith in the unknown, had driven us to seek it in the first place. If humanity was to survive, to expand beyond this planet, to endure the trials ahead, then it would not be science alone that carried us forward. It would be faith. Faith that there was more to existence than mere survival. Faith that there was meaning beyond equations and probabilities. The host finally found his voice. He was grasping now, not entirely convinced, but unable to dismiss what was happening in front of him. He asked the question that millions watching were already screaming at their screens. "So are you saying faith in God is necessary for progress?" Musk sat back. He thought for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Then, with a certainty that sent a ripple through the room, he answered, and the response sent shockwaves across the world. Social media erupted. The internet fractured into chaos. Some hailed him as a visionary. Others accused him of betraying reason. Headlines exploded across news sites, each twisting his words into their own narrative. Debates flared across continents, in universities, in religious institutions, in the very halls of power. But in that studio, Musk remained calm. Fictional, host, still stunned, struggled to regain control. But Musk had one final message to deliver, one that no one, neither his greatest supporters nor his fiercest critics, was prepared for. And with that, he uttered the words that would define the conversation for years to come. The world would never forget what happened next. The seconds stretched into eternity as the host sat frozen, his carefully curated professionalism cracking under the weight of the moment. The audience, both in the studio and across millions of screens, clung to every breath, every flicker of emotion on Musk's face. The billionaire, a man known for his calculated precision and relentless pursuit of progress, had just said something. That could not be unsaid. It wasn't just a passing thought. It wasn't a vague philosophical pondering. It was a statement that carried weight, a statement that would be dissected, debated, and devoured by the world in real time. Musk had just declared that faith, true, unshakable belief, was not only necessary for human progress, but that it was the very thing that made progress possible. The host exhaled slowly, as if trying to find his footing on ground that had just collapsed beneath him. He had prepared for many things in this interview. He had studied Musk's ventures, his philosophies, his controversies. He had anticipated discussions on AI risks, space colonization, even the dangers of unchecked technological advancement. But this was something else entirely. He leaned in, his voice lower now, his usual confidence laced with something else, something closer to unease. He asked the question that was now bouncing across every social media platform, every newsroom, every late-night discussion between friends and skeptics alike. Are you saying that science alone is not enough? Musk didn't hesitate. Science, he explained, was a magnificent tool, perhaps the most powerful tool humanity had ever wielded. It had illuminated the darkness, torn through ignorance, and unlocked the very fabric of reality. But a tool was only as powerful as the will that wielded it. The host pressed further, his skepticism rising like a defense mechanism. He brought up the usual counter-arguments, how blind faith had been used to suppress progress, to stifle questioning minds, to hold humanity back. History, he argued, was littered with the remains of those who had dared to think beyond the constraints of belief. How could Musk sit here as a man of reason and claim that faith was not only necessary, but fundamental? Musk's expression didn't waver. Faith, he clarified, was not the enemy of science. Fear was. He recounted the countless times in history when it wasn't faith that had held humanity back, but the fear of losing control, the fear of the unknown, the fear that, perhaps, we are not the masters of this universe, but merely its passengers. The host's jaw tightened. He wasn't conceding, but he was listening. Musk pushed forward. He spoke about the limits of artificial intelligence, the very thing he had spent years warning the world about. No matter how advanced AI became, it would never possess what humanity did: belief. An AI could calculate the trajectory of a rocket, but it would never dream of reaching the stars. A machine could process probability, but it would never sacrifice everything for something it could not see. Faith, Musk argued, was not just about religion, it was about the very essence of human existence, the ability to believe in something, beyond what is immediately provable, and that belief had driven every major leap in history. The first explorers who set sail into the unknown had no certainty of survival. The scientists who defied the status quo to pursue groundbreaking theories had no guarantee of success. The engineers at SpaceX had no proof that a reusable rocket was possible until they made it possible. Every monumental achievement, every paradigm shift, every step forward in human progress had been built on an irrational, unscientific belief that something greater awaited beyond the horizon. The host swallowed hard. His skepticism was still there, but now it was warring with something else, something he hadn't expected to feel during this conversation. Doubt, not doubt, in Musk's reasoning, but doubt in his own conviction that faith had no place in progress. These tension in the studio was suffocating. The audience remained transfixed, hanging in the balance between two opposing forces, skepticism and belief, logic and faith. It was no longer just a conversation. It was a battle for the very essence of how we perceive the future. And then, just when it seemed like the moment couldn't stretch any tighter, the host asked the question that would define the interview. "Do you believe in God, Elon?" A hushed murmur rippled through the audience. This was it, the inevitable confrontation. Musk held the host's gaze, and for the first time in the interview, there was a pause, a true, reflective pause, not because he was calculating his answer, but because this was not a question to be answered lightly. And then, finally, he spoke. He admitted that for most of his life, he had resisted the idea of God, not because he rejected the concept outright, but because his mind had always sought evidence, always demanded logic. But over time, something had shifted. He had witnessed things that defied mere probability. He had felt an undeniable pull, a sense of design woven into the chaos of the universe. And in his darkest moments, when SpaceX was on the brink of collapse, when Tesla was ridiculed as a failure, when his personal life had shattered in ways the public never knew about, logic had failed him. It was not mathematics that had carried him forward. It was not data that had convinced him to try again. It was something deeper, something inexplicable, something that, for lack of a better word, felt like faith. The studio was deathly silent. The host didn't speak. He simply sat there, staring, as if he too was grappling with something he couldn't define. And then, before the host could break the silence, Musk did something no one expected. He turned to the audience, not just the one in the studio, but the one watching from every corner of the world, and he asked them a question that shattered the divide between belief and skepticism, a question that no one had an easy answer for, a question that left the world forever changed. The key question hung in the air like a slow-moving storm, its weight pressing down on the studio, on the millions watching from their screens, on the very fabric of certainty itself. Musk wasn't asking rhetorically. He wasn't throwing out a vague philosophical musing to be lost in the noise of the internet. He was challenging them. His eyes scanned the audience, but his words were directed at the world. What if we've been looking at this the wrong way? The host flinched slightly, as if the very act of asking the question was dangerous. And perhaps it was. Musk leaned forward, his hands clasped, his tone steady but charged with something raw. What if faith and science were never meant to be opposing forces? What if they were both necessary to understand reality? The room felt smaller, more intimate now. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a reckoning. The host finally found his voice, his skepticism still intact but weakened. He admitted that Musk was making an argument he had never quite heard before, that perhaps the issue wasn't faith versus science, but rather how humanity had framed the conversation. Musk didn't let the moment slip. He pressed further. He spoke of quantum mechanics, of the bizarre, almost mystical nature of reality at the subatomic level. He reminded the audience that some of the greatest scientific discoveries had shattered previous understandings of what was possible. For centuries, he explained, humans believed the universe was made of predictable mechanical laws. Then we discovered quantum entanglement, particles interacting instantly across vast distances. No logical explanation, no clear mechanism, just reality-defying expectation. The host nodded slowly, as if realizing the trap he had walked into. Musk had done what no one expected. He had used science to prove the necessity of faith, because in the face of the unknown, what else was there? And then Musk took it one step further. He told a story he had never told before, the moment that truly changed him. The world listened. He described a night, years ago, when he stood on the SpaceX launch pad, staring at the Falcon 1 rocket, the fourth and final attempt after 3 catastrophic failures. This was it. If it failed, SpaceX was done. His dream was over. His money was gone. His credibility would be destroyed. The logical choice? Walk away. But he didn't. And in that moment, standing alone under the stars, something happened. He had expected fear, anxiety, doubt. Instead, he felt something entirely different, something he could never fully explain. Peace. An overwhelming certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. That this moment, this battle, this impossible dream, it mattered. And in that moment, he knew it wasn't logic keeping him there. It wasn't data. It was faith. Not blind faith. Not empty belief. But the kind of faith that creates reality. The kind of faith that dares to believe in something before it exists. The studio was motionless. The host swallowed, clearly shaken. He tried to pivot to regain control, but Musk wasn't. Finished. Every great innovation, Musk continued, began as an act of faith. The belief that something was possible before the proof existed. That's what separates us from machines, the host pushed back. Couldn't that just be optimism? A gut feeling? Musk considered the question carefully. Then he shook his head. Optimism was hoping things got better. Faith was knowing they could, even when everything suggested otherwise. That was why humans didn't just survive. They built. They pushed beyond what was rational. They chased the impossible. They reached for the stars, not because it was logical, but because they believed they were meant to. The audience was transfixed. And then Musk did something that turned the conversation into something even greater than anyone could have expected. He asked the second question, a question more personal, a question that forced everyone watching, including the host, to look inward. If you strip away everything, money, status, technology, what do you believe in? The host hesitated, and that was when the real confrontation began, because Musk wasn't just talking about himself anymore. He was talking about all of them, about the millions watching, the skeptics and the believers, the scientists and the dreamers. The world had been content living in two separate realities, one of science, one of faith. But what if they were meant to be one? What if faith was the driving force behind all great discoveries? What if humanity's greatest strength wasn't just intelligence, but belief? The host struggled for words. He wasn't just debating Musk anymore. He was debating himself. His entire career had been built on logic, skepticism, reason. But now he was faced with something he couldn't ignore. Because deep down, everyone in that room, everyone watching, had felt what Musk was describing, that unexplainable pull, that moment when reason says no, but something deeper whispers yes, that force that makes people chase impossible dreams, defy odds, build futures that should not exist. The world wasn't just watching an interview anymore, it was watching a paradigm shift, and just when the tension couldn't stretch any further, Musk looked directly at the camera. The question isn't whether faith and science can coexist. The question is, can we truly create a future without both? The screen faded to black, and the world exploded, not in fire, not in chaos, but in a way that no one could have predicted. The internet fractured into a war zone of ideas, debates raging in every corner of social media, from the depths of obscure forums to the main stages of global discourse. Musk's words had shattered the long-standing battle lines between faith and science, forcing people, whether they agreed with him or not, to confront the very foundation of their beliefs. Headlines dissected his every phrase. Some called him a visionary. Others accused him of betraying the rationalist principles that had defined his career. The scientific community responded with shock, admiration, and outrage in equal measure. Religious leaders weighed in, some embracing his message as a bridge between faith and progress, others skeptical of his interpretation, and yet, beyond all the noise, beyond the pundits and the think pieces, something deeper had happened. People were asking themselves the same question Musk had asked in that final moment, what do I believe in? Back in the studio, the silence was deafening. The host sat motionless, his hands clasped tightly together, his usual confidence replaced by something far more human. This was no longer an interview. It was a moment of truth. The audience remained frozen, locked in the aftermath of a conversation that had transcended mere words. Musk, for all his usual ease in handling high-stakes discussions, seemed almost introspective now, as if even he had not anticipated just how deep the conversation would go. Finally, the host leaned forward. His voice was softer now, stripped of the polished veneer that came with years of experience in front of a camera. There was no counterpoint left to make, no clever retort that could undo what had just unfolded. I didn't expect this, he admitted, the weight of honesty settling over the room. Musk didn't gloat. He didn't smirk or revel in the moment. Instead, he simply nodded, as if to say, neither did I. The host exhaled, searching for something, anything to conclude the discussion. But the truth was there was no easy way to wrap it up, because this wasn't the kind of conversation that ended neatly. It was the kind that changed people. In the days that followed, the impact of the interview continued to ripple across the world. Universities hosted debates about the nature of belief, faith, and progress. Scientists who had spent their lives dismissing faith as obsolete now found themselves questioning if they had overlooked something fundamental. Religious leaders who had long viewed science with suspicion saw, perhaps for the first time, a reason to embrace its discoveries without fear, and the people, the millions watching from their homes, their phones, their laptops, found themselves wrestling with something they couldn't quite define, something uncomfortable, something exhilarating. Because Musk hadn't given them an answer, he had given them a question that refused to be ignored. Musk himself remained surprisingly quiet in the immediate aftermath. No clarifications, no follow-up tweets to control the narrative. When asked about it during a later public appearance, he only shrugged and gave a small, knowing smile. People should think for themselves, was all he said, and that was the point. Not to prove one side right or wrong. Not to declare a winner in the eternal debate between science and faith, but to remind humanity that its greatest strength has always been its ability to ask, to wonder, to seek, to build rockets, to explore the stars, to reach beyond what is known, not just because the data supports it, but because something deeper drives us to do so. The interview had not changed Musk, but it had changed the conversation, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The final scene of the interview, the moment that would be replayed in classrooms, documentaries, and countless discussions for years to come, was simple. A camera shot of Musk sitting back in his chair, looking at the host, looking at the audience, looking at the world, and then a quiet smile, as if to say, "Now it's your turn."